You are listening to the Showbiz Side Hustle podcast, powered by Performerpreneur. I am your host here, Nicole Louise Geddes, and together we'll be delving into all of the ways that a showbiz side hustle can support you now and long into the future. So sit back, relax, and listen in, and together let's get inspired to take action to create the life, future, and business of your dreams. This episode is sponsored by the Showbiz Side Hustle Handbook, available on Kindle and in paperback over on Amazon. Follow the simple tasks laid out over 3 easy-to-action sections and effectively build a strong business foundation for a successful showbiz side hustle. Welcome back, everybody, to today's podcast episode, the Showbiz Side Hustle podcast. And today I am bringing in a wonderful expert, Chantelle, to talk to us about storytelling, brand building, brand voice. If you've been listening to the podcast, you'll know the last episode was about building a brand. I spoke very loosely, Chantelle, about all of the elements that are needed, that are necessary when building a brand. And then I thought, who can bring all of this together, thread it all, weave it all nicely? You are wordsmith of my kind of black book. So for those that are listening, Chantelle has a copywriting company, and she is an expert at selling stories, telling stories, pulling out stories from her clients. And I believe brand voice, Chantelle, is a really big part of the building a brand process. You have to get the personality right. You have to show yourself. And I'm going to speak on further podcasts about stepping into that spotlight, because I know that's not easy. And most people do think about that. Look at me, I've already gone off on an excited tangent. Most people do kind of think that that means showing your face on social media, but there can be other ways of being present and showing your personality. And that is why I think, people first and foremost think about going live on social media. That works. But why I wanted to introduce you to my listeners, look, I'm calming down, I'm so excited, is because there's a very, very different way of doing that. And that is by telling your story and using your words. And so over to you. Firstly, introduce yourself, and then tell me where we need to start. Like, what gold can we give my listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. So I'm Chantelle Davison, as you've kindly introduced me. I am a copywriter and a copy coach. So my business now I've been running for, goodness, about 6.5 years. That feels like it's gone very quickly. And I think copywriting and brand building, especially in online businesses, has changed a lot in the last 6 years. But yeah, absolutely, like you say, that kind of authentic brand voice is more important now really than it's ever been. I think one of the biggest changes we've seen since I started this business is that it used to be that in the online space you could talk about features and talk about benefits, and if people wanted that thing you're selling, they'd buy in. Great. But there's been a massive shift, I think, in the last, particularly since the pandemic, that's a cliche, but it's true, into people really having a bit more discernment about who they're buying from in terms of what brands they're buying from, what people they want to work with, what coaches they want to invest in. And it's become a lot more about the person, I think, about whether that person's values align with yours and whether you connect with them, whether you trust them. And in a really, really noisy online space like the one we operate in, trust is really difficult to earn if you are not showcasing a bit more about who you are. So I think more and more brand building is about that connection. It's about, tapping into what your ideal clients want, what their dreams are, how they want to feel, how they want to live, what their kind of dream life looks like, and figuring out how the product or service you sell can fit into that and talk about that and convey that. So I think branding is all about connection for me. When I think about my favorite brands, it's because they give me a certain feeling, whether that's inspiration or I feel warm and fuzzy, or it reminds me of family or friends or holidays, whatever that is. It's always about the feeling that brand elicits. And so, like you say, storytelling and the words you use are so powerful in terms of evoking those feelings in our ideal clients. So I guess that's where we start.
I love it. If you're watching on YouTube, because this podcast is available on all of the podcast platforms, but also YouTube, you'll just see me smiling along. Like I'm just literally like, yes, this is why Chantelle was my absolute first choice. That was so eloquently put, Chantelle, and that's your bag, isn't it? The words and the use of words to build emotion. And I felt quite emotional just listening to you because it is such an important part. And we all go with the visuals and the colours and the logo. And, you know, we think we've got a business brand at that point because it's exciting, especially for my listeners, because we're from the creative industries. That would be, you know, quite an easy win for us to just hit Canva, create a logo, find some brand colors, put our personality into those pictures. And so when you're talking about words and evoking emotions using them, I also don't fear that my listeners won't be able to do that. I think they will. I think they just need that guidance and that understanding, which I can just tell right now you're gonna gift us, so they can get going with it. Because, you know, we are creative, we're confident with spoken word, so why wouldn't we be confident to write it down? So I think you're absolutely right, and I'm very excited that already I think my listeners will be buying into this. Absolutely. So let's skip over the brand visuals, the colors, the logo, and then, you know, what would be your first thing as a copywriting coach, as a copywriter for a client? What would be your first few questions that you would be asking them, or we should be asking ourselves?
Yeah, great question. So I think when I start to explore someone's brand voice with them, there are a few key questions. First of all, one is obviously about who their ideal client is, who they're talking to, because we have to know what language is going to resonate before we know what language you can use in our brand. So who are you talking to? The difference is going to be if you're talking to, let's say, performers, you know, there might be a slightly more excitable vibe. There might be a more outgoing approach. Whereas if you're talking to, let's say, introverted business owners, like some people, you know, you're going to have a different vibe. So who is your ideal client? But then also, for me, what brand and copy and all of it really comes down to is, how do you want people to feel about your brand? How do you want people to feel when they see you on video? How do you want people to feel when they read your emails? How do you want people to feel when they, you know, listen to your podcast? Whatever it is, whatever you're writing or speaking or sharing, generally speaking, people have an answer to that question that's pretty consistent across the board. They know what they want to elicit. They know that they want their readers to feel inspired or excited or capable or empowered, whatever that is. I think that forms a really big part of our brand. So that's a question I usually start with, is how do you want people to feel? Because that will lend itself very neatly to figuring out what your brand Bible is in terms of your vocabulary. You know, what words are you going to use? Because if you want someone to feel excited, you're going to use a different cadence, and you're going to use short, snappy words, and you're going to, you know, speak quicker or have the flow of your work flow quicker. And if you want someone to feel safe and warm and supported, then you're going to have a slower cadence and the flow is going to be different. So all of this stuff, it really plays into the words that you use in your business. So that's where I'd be starting. How do you want people to feel when they read everything in your content? But also trying to figure out, how do they feel right now, so that you can articulate that properly. You know, are they right now scared, nervous, overwhelmed? You know, where are your ideal clients, and where do they want to be? So we're kind of thinking about all these different things in terms of the feelings we want to evoke in people. And then I tend to ask people, how would your friends describe you? Like, how do people who meet you describe you? How do your friends and family describe you? What is your personality like? Because again, this will play into the kind of language you're going to use. If you are really friendly, really approachable, really informal, it's going to be hi, hey, you know, slang, colloquialisms, maybe even swear words in your copy. I know my people wouldn't recognize me with the occasional obscenity in my emails. So, you know, it's what are you about? What's your personality, and how can we bring that into your brand and your copy?
That's brilliant. And funnily enough, when I wrote my book, plug in the book here, the Showbiz Side Hustle Handbook. My sister read it. She was one of the proofreaders at the beginning, and I dropped a swear word in the intro. Like, I was like passionate about how I was trying to portray this famine and feast element of the industry, the elephant in the room when it comes to financial stability. And I put, because I've passionately, and I do swear, of course, everyone does sort of drop them in, but I put it in the book, and the first thing she said was, that doesn't sound like you. You're, you know, I do swear, and she's heard me swear, but she was like, doesn't really, you know, feel like that's something you would say. But then I questioned whether it's because I haven't dared say it. So that was the difference. Yep. So that's going to lead me on to my next question, because I do swear. I'm happy to drop the occasional swear word in because I'm passionate, and I would say that absolutely my listeners, my readers would know that. So then my thoughts were like, is it because I have not been completely authentic leading up to this moment with how passionately I do feel about the famine and feast scarcity element of the industry? So I don't know what the question is there really, but I'm sure you can see where I'm going with it. That authenticity in what we say as well. And how do we draw that out and align with it consistently?
Yeah, great question. So I think when it comes to swearing, my opinion on it tends to be, if you would do it, because, okay, we all have a different voice in our personal lives with our sister, for instance, than we might with our clients. If you get on a live call with your people, with your clients, and you would swear, include it in your copy. If you would get on a live call with your client and you wouldn't swear, don't. Because the only reason to include it, the only reason to include any language or colloquialisms or, you know, frequently used words of yours, is so that there's not this disconnect between what people read and what people see. Because what happens if you have a totally different identity? You mentioned before we got on the call about people having kind of one voice for writing and one voice for speaking on camera. And I think that can be a really big problem, because where I mentioned at the start that trust is so important. Trust is bred from familiarity and consistency. And so if people hop on a live and they're a bit sweary, or they're running a training and they're a bit sweary, but in their copy they're really formal and it doesn't sound like them, or vice versa, there's a load of swearing in their copy, but when they get on camera they're really pulled together and professional, that creates cognitive dissonance. Like we go, there's a disconnect there, that's not the same person, and our trust gets broken. Which is why it's so important, almost whatever you do doesn't matter as much as making sure you do it everywhere. If that makes sense. So it's about that consistency, which is why I always say to people, you know, yes, to a certain extent, email copywriting is different from social media, it's different from websites, different from presentations, but the voice needs to be consistent. That brand voice needs to be consistent across those different platforms, because otherwise we end up with a LinkedIn Chantelle and a Facebook Chantelle and an Instagram Chantelle. And if people can't tie those together, that's not a Chantelle they're going to invest in. That's not a Chantelle they're going to spend their money with and trust. So it's about whatever you do, almost doesn't matter. Swear, don't swear. People, you know, horses for courses. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. I get as many replies to emails with swear words in saying, I love that you're so transparent and honest, as I do saying, I can't believe you dared to swear in my inbox. So I think it is just a case of figuring out what you want that brand to say about you and what you think swearing says about you, and whether that's aligned. And same with any words, like anything that you use in your brand vocabulary. It's just about being intentional about it. Which is why I always suggest to people literally having a Google Doc, which is your brand vocabulary, like your brand Bible. And when you notice or people point out to you there's words you say a lot, put them in there. And one of the best ways of doing this is by recording your calls. You know, you've used a bit of AI, you know that I use otter.ai. It's a really good transcription tool for all of my calls. And what that gives me is an absolute ton of transcriptions where I've been talking naturally. So I can go through those transcriptions and be like, right, what words do I say often, and pop that into my brand Bible. And then I've got this very realistic picture of the language I actually use versus the language I think I should use, because those are two quite different things.
It's brilliant. And you're absolutely right. For reference, I took the word out But I think you're right. I think I'm talking generally about, that kind of what version of you are you showing, and to keep that consistency, like what level. And I guess that where that's leading to next is in that consistency, in that question of the brand voice, what are you saying regularly? And it can evolve. So, that brand Bible you're talking about, which is a brilliant idea. I think we should all just sit down and get started with that. That can evolve. And I speak often through the podcast about, this is not set in stone. Move with it, evolve, experience, experiment, and it can evolve. That's not quite where I was going. So please keep evolving these versions of what you're saying, and then keep them consistent. My thought was, and I've lost track of thought now, my thought was more leading now into the storytelling part. Because to build that know, like, and trust, like you've said, they have to see this consistency, they have to see your personality, they have to start to understand and know and relate to you. So there's a bit in my last podcast about literally stepping into the spotlight, be verbally, vocally, on paper, in emails, and telling your story. And I know that makes people a little bit nervous. It's made me nervous in the past. In the last podcast, I've mentioned that you don't have to tell the whole story. And what are your thoughts on that? Which bits do you, and how do you appreciate or voluntarily tell of your story?
So I might not be the best example of this. I'm a massive oversharer. So I ADHD brain, my tendency is just to share all of the information about my life. However, I do have some very specific things that I keep back that are just mine. And I think, again, it comes down to intentionality. It's figuring out, right, where is that Venn diagram of things that are relatable to my audience and things I feel comfortable with my audience knowing. And whatever sits in the middle of that gets shared. Sometimes I edge to the wrong side of it, but hopefully whatever sits in the middle of that gets shared. And for me, it comes down to a few questions. It's, if I'm sharing stuff about other people, are they comfortable with that? Whether that's people in my life, partners, kids, parents, family, friends, clients. And am I comfortable with anyone reading that? Because it's easy to think we're just sharing with a few people in our audiences, but we're putting stuff out on the internet. It could be seen by anyone. So it is good to be conscious of, am I comfortable with this forming part of my brand identity? So for me, the way I choose stories to tell is using the kind of guide and hero trope that we talk about in copywriting, where our job as a business owner is to be the guide that helps the hero, the client, succeed in their journey. So I want to tell stories that build authority, that show that I either have solved this problem for myself or I've solved it for people like them, so they can see that I'm the right person to help them in their journey, or that demonstrate empathy, so they know I understand them, I see and hear and connect with the challenges they're facing, with the dreams they have. So stories that do one of those two things for me are the key. And I think there's a kind of common misconception that to be vulnerable, to be empathetic, to be vulnerable in our storytelling means we have to overshare or share everything, or tell all the nitty-gritty about the horrible things in our lives, or trauma dump. But actually quite the opposite. What we want to do is carefully tell stories that demonstrate empathy, that show our vulnerable side, but where we can also show that we have resilience, or we have dealt with the situation, or we have advice for how to overcome that. So we're not just trauma dumping. I think any stories where you're just trauma dumping and it's just a little self-pity party, or it's how hard life is, or those kinds of ones, whilst everyone connects to those, there has to be some story loop closing when we're sharing stories in our business, I think. And that doesn't mean that we can't be vulnerable. It just means, like I say, closing the story loop. So for instance, if I'm sharing about mental health problems, which I sometimes do, it'll be, okay, this is an experience I've had or I'm having. What can I learn from that? What can I share that has taught me? What does that enable me to better do for my clients, my audience, my people? I don't know if that answers your question, but
It absolutely answers
okay,
it. No,
good.
it's brilliant. No, it really does. I'm just listening. I'm just absorbing it all. I'm just listening and just loving it because you're absolutely right. You know your stuff. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast to share this because it's beautiful and it's scary. And so actually you saying, there is a version of events that don't get told, that don't need to be told. And I think on the internet, when we're trying to work out what we should and shouldn't do in terms of being visible, social media, stepping into the spotlight, copywriting, you view it from where we're sat and you think everybody's sharing everything. So I think it's really nice to have that confirmation that it doesn't need to all be shared. I spoke about, smoke and mirrors, which bit are you happy to share and which you're not. And I also spoke about a story timeline, like which things in your story, in your life, are you above the line, happy to share, below the line, they're mine and they're private. But I think you've explained it even better, as I knew you would, about, that does it need to be told in terms of building trust, but also showing support and all of those wonderful things that you said about the story. And I love the Venn diagram. Just been doing that with my son and with maths. Because we're homeschooling in Oman because it's raining.
Amazing.
Don't ask. But I love a Venn diagram, and I think that should be something that people need to, think about in many versions of business. What sits in those sides and what sits in the middle. So I'm really excited and grateful that you shared those tips because I think too many of us think that it's all or nothing. And then that stops people in their tracks from doing anything at all. So I have confirmed in the last podcast, you have just reiterated, it's the bits that are necessary, that you're happy to share. And I think I had missed the very, very important point, which you have made, other people. Other people that you're sharing or talking or not. I mean, it seems obvious, but sometimes that overshare does include people that are not going to like that either. So I'm grateful for those top tips. You obviously, Chantelle, are a master at this. So if somebody was sat thinking, I don't know where to start, I can't start, they could get in touch with yourself and people like you. But then the first thought that comes to mind is, but they wouldn't know, my personality, but that's your job. So can you explain how, because people have that ability to outsource this. That's another thing I say often. Like if it's something you struggle with, who can help? Who can you outsource to? Who can you find support from? So what would you say if people were thinking, but how does that work in terms of finding a brand voice through you or people?
Sure, yeah. So first of all, when it comes to storytelling, you're right, a lot of people are scared. I actually have a free resource I can share with you and your audience. I've got this kind of 30-day of storytelling prompts. So I send an email out every day. And the way I do that is it's a prompt that people can literally fill in the blanks for, or use in their own way. And then I share an example of my story using that prompt so that you can kind of see it in action. And really, the answer to how do you figure out what your brand voice is, well, by practicing, by writing lots of stuff and seeing what feels like you, what feels natural. But if you're outsourcing to a copywriter, yeah, it's going to be their job to help you pull that out. So what I do when I get clients on an intake call, once they've decided to work with me, is we spend about 90 minutes together. And essentially, I just ask them a million questions about themselves, about their ideal client, about the feelings they want to evoke in their clients, about their offers and what transformation they provide. And often it feels a bit like therapy and it feels a little bit, like, why is she asking these questions? But what they do is draw out those sort of, I guess, more exploratory answers that people wouldn't necessarily be asked very often. So you might be asking, like I say, what feeling do you want your client to feel after they've worked with you? How do you want them to describe the experience of working with you? And by asking these questions, you pull out a lot of language that, were you put on the spot and asked to write down what is my brand voice, you might not have an answer. But actually, by talking to someone in conversation and in that flow, talking about the thing you know tons about, that you're passionate about, that you help people with, you sort of instinctively come up with the language that needs to be part of your brand voice and part of your brand messaging and part of the story you're going to tell. So it's usually the case that people get on that call, talk for 90 minutes, have no idea what they've said. And then I'll send them a piece of copy and they'll go, oh my God, this is amazing. How'd you come up with that? And I'm like, it's pretty much what you said. I'm like, cool. I've used your words to create this, you know this stuff. And so I think that's kind of why I still do lots of done for you copywriting work, but it's why I lean into the copy coaching and want to help people try and do this themselves too, because I think so often people think that writing is this kind of God-given skill, like you either have it or you don't, it's a talent, but actually it's not. It's a skill you can definitely learn, and there's a lot of kind of technique and structure, particularly to copywriting, to how to structure a sales page, how to structure sales emails. There's a lot of science to that. So yeah, people can definitely figure that out, and AI is a brilliant tool for helping you identify your brand voice as well. So one of the things that I do now is, if I have a discovery call with someone, intake call with someone, I have that transcript, I'll pop that through an AI tool and ask it to share with me the most commonly used words that person's said, or what are the sentiments they repeated, what are the kind of colloquialisms or slang words that they use, how did they greet me, and it can help you pull out some of those really important pieces of information, and you can use that on yourself too. So if you've got videos of yourself, you could get a transcription of that video, pop that through something like ChatGPT and say, help me figure out what my brand voice is. How do I sound? Define my brand voice for me. And it'll give you something, and some of it you might go, yeah, that's definitely me, and some of it you're like, oh, and I'm not sure I want that so much. But it's a really good starting point. So ChatGPT and using transcriptions of yourself talking is a brilliant place to start when you're thinking about, what is my brand voice and how could I define that?
I love that. That's so good. And I know that that's another one of your expertise, like another area of expertise for you is the AI. So we'll have to get you back on for another podcast to talk about that, because I know personally how valuable that is, and how, informed and what you do with that. So that's awesome. I'm listening and I'm thinking, there's one thing that's striking me here, and it's, as a performer, we all had to write a bio. So this might not sound like it aligns, but I feel like it's something we could relate to. So when you write a bio for yourself, the first time you write it is just orcs. Like, you're like, oh my God, I can't say that about myself. I can't shout that from the rooftops,
Yep.
So then when you write it in third person and you kind of take a step back and go, right, imagine that my mum's writing this about me. Like, these are the things I've done. And I wonder if that's kind of a good place to start in terms of this brand voice and personality. Third person, you did mention about, what do people say about you? Like, ask those questions to those people nearest and dearest. Or I think most of the time we just have this kind of shyness and we don't want to shout about ourselves, which, in business, we do have to shine a light on our superpowers. And so maybe start to think about some of these things in third person, if that makes it easier. Find the bits that you're comfortable with sharing first, and then build up your confidence to be loud and proud about the things that you are good at and the things that people say about you. So that was just something I thought, this feels like when you write your first bio. And I know my listeners will appreciate that kind of feeling when you do that. So third person, that would be, aligned with getting a copywriter to do that. That's how it felt when you were saying it. It's somebody else extracting your awesomeness and putting that into your brand Bible. We can do that, apart from we have to be brave enough to do that. So there's a confidence and courageous element there. Like, how brave are you going to be when it comes to shouting about yourself? Any tips for that, Chantelle?
For writing a bio specifically, or for
just for being brave and shining a light on our superpowers?
Yeah, I think kind of what we said at the beginning, really. If you think about how you want people to feel when they work with you, start there and reverse engineer it. So if you want people to feel supported, safe, then your brand voice, hopefully, could be described as supportive, encouraging. So start thinking about the things that you want to be in order to bring out those feelings in your clients. So yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, like you say, you're in business, you're going to have to talk about your strengths. Presumably, if you sell a service or a product, it's because you think it can help people. So you're not doing anyone any favors by hiding any of that goodness under a bushel. I think it helps to think of your brand as separate from yourself sometimes as well. You know, my brand is supportive, inspiring, encouraging, because that's what the people that I'm selling my service need from me. My personality is hopefully what's going to connect with them and come across, but actually my brand is not necessarily the same thing as my personality. So I think having that separation can be really helpful when we're thinking about our business brand, separating ourselves slightly from that. So we're not our business. We can individuate slightly and go, okay, I might be as a person a little bit insecure and neurotic, but that's not going to be my brand voice. My brand voice is going to be encouraging and relatable, because that's the sort of same thing, but in a way that's going to help people. So I do think that separation can be quite helpful. You know, what does your business need to be from the people you want to help? And thinking of it in that way, you know, if I don't shine a light on the things I do well, I can't help anyone with those strengths and skills. So how can you, yeah, like that bio piece is, you know, let's say the bio is, I am I don't know, a brave performer. I go where other people won't. I am not afraid. I'm, you know, I'm bold. I'm visionary, whatever that is. If it's because you know that's what people need from your performance, you're going to have to get that into into how you describe yourself. It's essentially just finding out what people need and figuring out how to describe things in a way that meets that need. I think that's
a top tip. I think it's a top tip to disconnect slightly. And the problem we have, all of us, yourself included, is we're heart-led. You know, we're building businesses and these brands because we are building them from our hearts. They're passion projects that have turned into, you know, potential big money earners, like big businesses. They start so internally and personally that sometimes it is difficult. And just going back a few conversations earlier, you'd said something about people. It's not just the people you think reading. And I think that's the bit that stops many of us. We are quite aware that that is a thing. You know, you're putting this stuff out into the world and you think you know who's reading, but you also have a bit of a thought of who else is going to experience that. And that's why I speak often about building on, especially my listeners, the confidence techniques and the hacks that we've had as performers to just push through. But I think you saying to detach yourself, use again our performance backgrounds and those techniques to step onto the stage, the spotlight, that, you know, the email as that version of you that you're leaving the other version in the dressing room and becoming. Like, we have these skills, we've used them, which is why I think performers make great entrepreneurs, because we have the skills that many entrepreneurs don't have from our performing backgrounds. So it's just intertwining them. I'm so excited by what you have gifted us with your thoughts, your top tips, you know, your words. And I just know that the people that are listening, if they sit and really listen to what you've just shared, there's light bulbs going to be flashing on all over the place. And I can't wait to see the next lot of emails drop into my email inbox from people that I'm following, or social media posts that just open up a little bit more about them and that brand voice and that personality. Chantelle, I could speak to you all day, and I am going to get you back on for an AI conversation, but to round off building a brand, storytelling, stepping into the spotlight, brand voice. I mean, we've spoken about a lot very quickly. What would you like your kind of lasting memory, lasting tip to be from this podcast? People are listening, like, just to round it up, have you got just that kind of moment that we go, that's the one, that's what I'm going to remember Chantelle telling me?
No pressure.
Gotta be big. I mean, you've given us enough, but it's just kind of bringing it all together.
I do. I think it kind of comes from a lot of the different things we've been talking about, particularly about stepping into the spotlight and storytelling and brand voice. It's really important to remember that we're not for everyone. Like, we are not writing copy for every single person on the internet to like us. Our business is not a people-pleasing project. Our business is a business for the ideal clients we want to work with. So when you're writing your story, when you're putting yourself out there, being as authentically you as you can be, being vulnerable, being empathetic, being authoritative, you are going to repel as many people as you attract. And I really want to encourage people to see that as a good thing. The goal with creating a brand, the goal with having an identity, the goal with having copy that really connects with some people is to call in the people who are the right fit for us, and equally to reject and repel the people who aren't. So a piece of this is genuinely just, you have to be okay with some people not liking your brand, maybe even you, if you're going to be visible online. There are plenty of people who I am not for. And every time I post, I'm sure they cringe or mock it or think I'm, being an oversharing person. And I just have to be okay with that, because there is no way to be visible, to be successful, to build a brand and make sure everyone likes you. So you get to choose one. You can either make sure everyone likes you by staying quiet, agreeing with everything, having no opinions, never being controversial, being completely vanilla, or you can be the person that gets their diary booked up because people who do love you so much because you're being exactly who you are. I think that's
yeah, I just got goose pimples. We had not planned this podcast, everyone that's listening. We just went into the conversation. I said, Chantelle, you and I know each other. This will be great. And I wasn't expecting that ending, but boy, you couldn't have said a better one. Honestly, I've got goose pimples because I think it's what we all need to hear. People in my circles, people in your circles, every circle, we need to hear that. And the internet can be a scary place because, like I'd said, there's plenty of people watching but I think you've absolutely put that into words. And so I encourage everyone to be brave, to step up, to be authentic, to tell their story, share their voice, and repel the people that are not into us, because that is necessary to
absolutely. It's an acting tip too, right? For performers, depersonalizing rejection, then that's the same thing. Depersonalize the rejection, because it's not necessarily about you. It might just be the person reading's having a shit day, or they don't like that style or whatever. So if you can depersonalize the rejection and just be totally okay with people who like me are gonna like me, people who aren't, you will just be so much more peaceful, so much more happy.
That's it, isn't it, as well? Yeah. You will. We can't please everybody. What a fantastic way to end the podcast. Chantelle, I'm so thankful that you gave up your time today to speak to us. Please just let everyone know where we can find you. I'll also pop that into the show notes, and that kind offer of your free resource. We'll put a link to that as well. So please, everybody, go and check Chantelle out. Let us know where we can find you on socials and websites, or wherever you hang out. Let us know.
Sure, yeah. So my website is choicewordsbychantelle.com. And on Instagram, I'm at Copywriting Business Coach. On Facebook, I'm just Chantelle Davison. And I will share the free link to the 30 Days of Storytelling. And you can get in touch if you have any questions. I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. And that's a genuine open invite, everybody. If you need any help with copy, Chantelle will be there to support you. So go find her on her socials and download that storytelling. We're all going to have the same stories coming out now, because I'm going to download it too. We're going to end there, Chantelle. Thank you so much again. Big love. And everybody, come and listen into the next episode dropping next Wednesday. Big love. Okay, guys, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you for joining me here on the Showbiz Side Hustle podcast. So until next time, please do take a little bit of action, that very first step, and make sure that you are doing something for you and your Showbiz side hustle this week to move you forward and get you heading quickly and swiftly and strategically towards success.